For more than a century, the haunting voice of the iron horse echoed across the land. From the eastern seaboard, over the seemingly endless plains and through the western mountains, steam locomotives fused a sprawling landmass into a solid nation. Theirs was a call to dreamers of every age, wafting them from humdrum schoolroom or office to fancied adventures on the high iron. Lucky the boy who one day could say he had seen them in action. For by 1960, the age of steam had virtually ended, and the thrill of seeing a mammoth engine at work was to be only a happy memory of childhood. Of all the locomotives in the long history of the rails, one of the greatest was called Big Boy, a name by which the world knew an engine that closed a memorable era in Western railroading. It was the last of the giants. Built as machines to produce transportation, steam locomotives seldom were endowed with grace of line, and then never at the sacrifice of efficiency and power or speed. For those who ran them and serviced them, the 25 engines of our 4000 class climaxed American steam freight locomotive design. So Big Boy was a railroad man's everyday working tool. But it had romantic aspects, too, in the dreams of those grown-up youths who, as bankers or teachers or house painters, secretly yearned to trade places with the engineer in his cab. The sight of Big Boy fighting the grades of Wyoming Sherman Hill was, to these aficionados, a picture more treasured than any in the world's galleries. The shattering sounds from its stacks and the moan of its chime whistle more stirring than any concert hall melody. Rugged and powerful, it was on call around the clock, around the calendar, to ride a trail of steel as it drew bales and boxes and carloads of the world's goods, from east to west to east again. Although its evolution began a century and a quarter before the music of this machine ever rang through Utah's Weber Canyon or drummed across the Rocky Mountain Plateau, Big Boy's true ancestors were more recent. Locomotives like Big Boy were products of grueling schedules versus little engines. Surged ahead in the West around the turn of the century, railroads serving that territory found they needed more power for increasingly longer trains. The power problem raised by lengthening a train had long been met by adding another locomotive. Double heading saved time on urgent freight, but it also meant investment in extra locomotives, expensive machines whose periods of usefulness were subject to the rise and fall of business. Nevertheless, it was a grand sight to see a pair of husky little haulers leaving town to the tune of out-of-beat exhausts. Museum piece with its 6 churning driving wheels was new in 1890, it was considered a Samson of the rails. But that was not enough, even then, and soon 6 drivers grew to 8. Then 8 became 10. As more feet were added to the iron horse, larger cylinders were needed to power them. More steam was needed to work the cylinders. And in this jack-built house on wheels, a larger boiler to supply the steam. power brought more weight, which, though it aided traction by pressing the drivers to the rail, required more wheels to distribute it. The longer the locomotive grew, the more it became like a centipede with a stiff neck. It had difficulty following tracks that wound with rivers and mountains. Size also was limited by bridges and tunnels designed for the smaller locomotives and cars that had been adequate in the early days. The same problem came up on European railroads. One answer to the power and size spiral was found by a Frenchman, Anatole Mallet. Far from being a comic character, Mallet was a brilliant engineer. In 1889, he built a flexible locomotive. He made two short engine units, then joined their frames with a hinge pin. An extra pair of cylinders was added to drive the rear unit. A large boiler completed the design. Voila! The railroad world had here a new and useful piece of equipment. It bent in the middle to take curves freely. Being hinged or articulated, engines could be made longer with more wheels to distribute the weight that was the partner of power. The first Mallet used in America, one which railroaders affectionately called Old Maud, ran on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. The Virginian and Erie railroads went Mallet one better and built locomotives with 3 engine units, powerful brutes but steam-hungry and hard to maintain. Mallet engines like Old Maud also were of the economical compound type. They used the steam twice. It came from the boiler first to the rear set of cylinders at high pressure. Then, as it expanded, it passed at lower pressure into a second and larger set before exhausting through the smokestack. In 1918, we put a number of Mallets to work on heavy grades. True to type with bulging front cylinders, these engines did a good job of pulling, but they were slow movers and hard on track. The moving parts of the front units were so large and heavy that at higher speeds the track suffered continuous and devastating hammering. Like most Western railroads, our lines stretch over long distances, and speed is essential to maintain good service. To get both the power and speed we needed, we returned in the mid-20s to the rigid frame engine. The result was the 9000 series, a locomotive of singular design. With 12 coupled driving wheels, it was the largest non-articulated engine ever built. It ran twice as fast as the Mallets, yet used less fuel. The 9000s served well on the plains, where rails curved gently. But in mountain country, where winding tracks resisted stiff-legged engines, their efficiency and power were impaired. So, as early as 1936, using roller bearings and better steels, we revived the articulated type locomotive. The result was the famous Challenger. Unlike the Mallets, the Challengers and their later somewhat refined cousins, the 3900 class, used only high-pressure steam in both sets of equal-sized cylinders. They seemed the final answer to the railroader's dream. But with the threat of World War II, still more was asked of the railroads. A greater hauling capacity was needed, and even these locomotives were found wanting. Big Boy was born of necessity. Now the stretching of the locomotive had reached its maximum. Where the Challengers and 3900s had 2 sets of 6 drivers, Big Boy had 2 groups of 8. Like its forerunners, it had 4-wheel trucks under the front cylinders to lead it through the curves, and under the cab to support the huge firebox. Whether it was booming along at 80 or drifting easy, Big Boy radiated majesty. Massive and compact, a solid workhorse, yet limber as a trotter, magnificence was paired with performance. The 4000s were the largest and heaviest of their type ever built, 132 feet long, 1.25 million pounds in weight. Every inch of Big Boy had the look of irresistible force. Enough, in fact, to pull a loaded 5.5-mile-long train on level track. Big Boy also furnished power to check the hurtling tons behind it. A common sight on trains descending Sherman Hill was a swirl of smoke streaming from every wheel as the brakes were applied, energized by compressed air from the locomotive. There was a family resemblance about Big Boy and the 3900. Heavy-jowled with bulky cylinders, each had a bright eye low on a double chin of air compressors. The bell was a forelock, the pilot like a steel beard. A 3900 carried our familiar shield in the center of its face-like smokebox front, Big Boy below the headlight. A distinguishing feature of this type of articulated locomotive was the reluctant manner in which the long, rigid boiler followed the front free-swinging engine unit around a curve. Mallay's first little double-jointed locomotive had come a long way. In fact, all locomotives had long before disproved early 19th century scoffers who had said smooth driving wheels on smooth rails would spin futilely. They hadn't considered adhesion supplied by the engine's weight. Although nearly 3/4 of Big Boy's tonnage was on its 68-inch drivers, tractive power sometimes overcame even this force. Cylinders, each larger than a 40-gallon oil drum, powered the 16 drivers. Steam at 300 pounds pressure was distributed to the cylinders by valves timed with a mechanical device that created a fascinating counterpoint in motion. The engineer controlled this complicated valve mechanism and could change the direction of travel with an auxiliary machine, the reverse gear. Life in Big Boy began in the firebox, a high-efficiency furnace so large that a human fireman could hardly shovel enough coal into it to make steam for the whistle. A mechanical stoker clawed fuel from the tender, passed it by an Archimedes screw to the firebox, then sewed it across the fire. Within the steel boiler, water circulated around more than a mile of tubes and flues that carried a red-hot hurricane to generate and superheat the steam. With Big Boy's size, 2 stacks were needed. Hoods to deflect the smoke and permit a clear view from the cab often were used by the engineer. Most of a steam locomotive's life was spent in or near its own special den, the roundhouse. Though sturdy and reliable, even Big Boy often needed attention and service. Better than most engines, its availability for pulling trains still was relatively low. The roundhouse rights began at the end of the run when the fire was dumped and the grates cleaned and cooled. A never-ending job was that of removing ashes cleared from Big Boy's garage-sized firebox. Good maintenance required frequent washing to flush away the grit and grease that always gathered on a steam engine. The locomotive first was pushed through a shower, then finished by hand. After a round of inspection that included a search for leaking steam connections, Big Boy was ready for the roundhouse. Once inside, the engine might be there only a few hours while the boiler was emptied and washed. But if heavy repairs were needed, it went to the back shop for perhaps a month. where first it was disassembled with the aid of a heavy-duty crane. One task was fitting Big Boy with new shoes, steel tires for its drivers, a periodic precision job for back shop machinists with special skills and tools. After being machined, the tire was ready for mounting. It had been bored about 1/8 of an inch smaller than the diameter of the wheel center. In a spectacular operation, it was made to fit. Gas flames heated and expanded the tire until it was larger than the wheel. After the tire was driven into place, and before it cooled and shrank to grip the wheel securely, it was gauged for correct position. In another part of the shop, the pipe fitters would be busy with Big Boy's boiler. Tubes and flues, as well as another mile of piping that made up the superheater, often had to be repaired or replaced. There were very few small parts on a 4000. The tools were equally large and heavy, and the work was hard. It was a rare breed who maintained these giants, like the foreman who retired after spending his entire working life in a roundhouse, then returned to visit nearly every day, like the machinist who set valves on Big Boys all day, then spent much of the evening building a model railroad at home. To ready a locomotive for the road, once the fire had been rekindled and the boiler was full of steam, all that remained to be done was to add fuel and water. Into the elephantine tender were tumbled 28 tons of coal, enough to heat the average house for many seasons. For the thirsty boiler, the 86-ton tender also carried 25,000 gallons of water, more than enough for a good-sized home swimming pool. With a heavy train, a 4000 often went through most of its food and drink within the first half of a 57-mile trip over Sherman Hill. It took many people many hours to return Big Boy to the job of moving freight over the main line. Standing docile as the running orders were read, only the quick-breathing fire, the droning generator, and the clanking, wheezing air pumps bespoke its latent power. Once the engineer on his hero throne had cracked the throttle to start the tons a-rolling, it took some doing to hold Big Boy back. Was a king of the rails who came to life in a fusion of steam and steel. He proclaimed his presence with a rhythmic cough and a throaty cry, belching smoke and trailing steam. He pounded through his domain with a flashing and spinning of rods and wheels. His was an awesome majesty, but he was the last of his line to be toppled by new monarchs of the track. 18 years that the big boys reigned, they ran up a total of nearly 26 million miles, hauling billions of tons of freight as prime movers along our wartime lifeline, later carrying the goods of peace and a rising economy. During his final years, Big Boy made his last stand on a short but busy section of our main line, tough, demanding Sherman Hill. And then it was only during the annual fall rush, a few weeks a year. Even as the last wisps of steam were vanishing from railroading's yesterday, Big Boy's successors were ushering in a speed and space-hungry era. He gave way as electronics, jet power, and the atom were put to work on the iron trail. So Big Boy marked the end of big steam railroading in the West. He was not abandoned because he failed at what he was designed to do, but because a more efficient breed of iron horse appeared in the evolution of railroad locomotives. The vital link between East and West that was forged with steam engines is made even stronger today with modern motive power. The day has no end for the railroad, but whatever locomotive progress shall put at the head of tomorrow's train, the rumble and roar of Big Boy will seem still to echo from the high country of southern Wyoming.
This is our great country, the land we live in, the land we're so proud of, our own United States of America. It's a big country, this land of ours. A country of broad plains and rolling prairies, of vast forests and fertile fields, rivers and lakes, high mountains, little villages, and great cities. No wonder we're so proud of America. There's so much to be proud of. And here's one of the most wonderful things about this vast country of ours. No matter where we want to travel, no matter how far raw materials and finished products must be transported, there are trains, beautiful, comfortable passenger trains for people to travel on, and long, sturdy freight trains to carry all kinds of raw materials and manufactured goods. Have you ever stopped to think how really important railroads are? Have you ever thought of what it takes for the millions of people in this great country to be able to travel from one end of the land to the other with speed, safety, comfort, and at low cost? Have you ever marveled at the iron ore and coal and hundreds of other raw materials that move continuously to the nation's widespread factories? And how thousands of different finished products are delivered from where they are made to where they are needed in all parts of the country. Have you ever wondered how the foods we eat are always being delivered from the farms to our markets? and how they arrive fresh as the day they were picked. Well, the answers to those questions make up one of the most fascinating and important stories in the history of our country, the story of the American railroads. In order to tell you that story, we're going to visit the railroad yards. We're going into the railroad stations and out along the tracks. In that way, you will get a better idea of what the nation's railroad system is like and the big, important job trains are always doing. Then, the next time you are on a train, or the next time you see a train speeding off into the distance, you'll understand how much we all depend on railroads and how much they do to help make and keep this land of ours the most wonderful and prosperous nation in the world. When our country was young and much smaller than it is today, traveling was slow, uncomfortable, and dangerous, and so people didn't travel very much. Then, just a little more than 100 years ago, came the one thing the young country needed to grow into an important nation: adequate transportation. That transportation came in the form of railroads. Those early trains were funny little affairs when compared with the big trains we see rolling today. But they had a lot to do with opening up and developing vast new territories, which later became states. You could say that America and her railroads grew up together. As the railroads pushed ahead, settlers followed. Farms were cleared and crops planted. Mines were opened, and the railroads began moving the ore and the coal to mills and factories. Villages which sprang up around the railroad stations grew and prospered into big, important cities. Throughout the length and breadth of the land, trains come and go, day and night, in all kinds of weather, carrying millions of people and millions of tons of freight. Because we don't always see the trains which serve us, maybe everyone doesn't realize how essential railroads are to our everyday living. But somewhere on its journey from raw materials to finished products, nearly everything we eat, wear, or use moves by train. And only railroads have the capacity to carry at low cost and over long distances the enormous volume of goods it takes to keep this nation going. Trains carry people, too. And as everyone likes to travel, suppose we see what happens when we take a train trip. We'll go along with these two friends of ours, Carol and Jimmy. That is, if Jimmy can ever get Carol's suitcase shut. In real life, their parents would probably go along with them. But for this picture, suppose we let Carol and Jimmy travel by themselves, okay? There they go in the taxi cab that will take them to the railroad station. Almost every town has a railroad station. Some are larger than others, but all railroad stations, large or small, are very interesting places. For example, at most railroad stations, you will usually find the Railway Express. You will see people checking and sorting packages to make certain that they will be put aboard trains which will take them to their destinations without delay. And remember, they will handle almost anything, including your dog. In the yards of many railroad stations, cars are cleaned inside and out to put them into tip-top condition for the passengers who will soon be getting aboard. In another part of the yards, dining cars are stocked with fresh vegetables, meats, milk, and all the other foods that will be needed for the meals that will be served when the train is on its way. Nearby, there is usually an engine house where locomotives are brought for cleaning and servicing. Maybe you've wondered how great big locomotives are turned around. Well, let's watch and see how easy it is. The locomotive is run onto the turntable. On goes the power, and around goes the locomotive as easy as you please. Say, we'd better not forget Carol and Jimmy. Here they are, arriving in plenty of time to check their baggage and buy their tickets before their train is scheduled to leave. Pay the taxi driver, Jimmy, and get a check from the red cap for each one of your handbags. The next stop is to buy tickets. Now, let's see. Jimmy and Carol are going to visit their aunt and uncle at a town about 1,000 miles away. They will be coming back by train, so they will buy round-trip tickets. Buying round-trip tickets, they will be saving money, too. The ticket clerk stamps each ticket with the date on which the ticket is purchased and the date on which the ticket is used. So far, so good. As Carol and Jimmy are going to sleep on the train, they'll have to have sleeping car tickets, too. That's right. You're all set now. Say, you'd better not take too much time paying for your tickets, Jimmy, because here comes your train. There's nothing quite as exciting as a railroad station at train time. From the time the train arrives until it is ready to leave again is usually only a matter of a very few minutes. But during that short period, many things happen. Trunks, luggage, and other such items are loaded into the baggage car near the head end of the train. The United States mail is put aboard the railway mail car. Windows are cleaned by a mechanical washer. Friends and relatives bid each other last-minute goodbyes. Passengers like Carol and Jimmy board their cars and are shown their space in the car by the porter. It's just about time now for the train to pull out. All aboard! The train conductor signals to the locomotive engineer. In a matter of seconds, the wheels start turning. Smoothly, almost without effort, the train gathers momentum. And before long, it is out in the open country again, running along at top speed. It's really great fun traveling on trains. You can sit for hours just watching the scenery as it rushes by. It's almost like a travel motion picture, one of the most interesting motion pictures you could possibly imagine. Here's the conductor. Tickets, please. Most passenger trains carry the United States mail, for the railroad postal car is the very backbone of our country's mail service. These men are railway postal clerks, just like the clerks in the post office at home, except that here they work while the train speeds along. Watch them sort the mail, getting it ready for delivery by the time the train reaches the proper station. One of the most popular cars on almost any passenger train is the dining car, a real restaurant on wheels. Table for two? Right this way, please. Now, Carol and Jimmy, what do you think you'd like to eat? What a choice. Almost anything you can think of. And if you need any help, the steward is only too pleased to offer some suggestions. Here's an interesting part of the train most people never get a chance to see. The dining car kitchen. No space is wasted, and everything is spick and span. That food really looks good enough to eat, doesn't it? Looks as though Carol and Jimmy topped off their meal with ice cream. What's this? Oh, the check. That's all right, my good man. Keep the change. Modern trains provide low-cost, dependable, comfortable, and safe transportation. They have spacious air-conditioned lounge and dome cars where passengers can relax and read or sit and talk with fellow passengers. There are many types of accommodations on modern trains. There are single rooms like this called roomettes. There are bedrooms, compartments, and more spacious drawing rooms, all with the latest conveniences, rooms which make up into sleeping rooms at night. That's right, Carol. Always use the ladder to get into an upper. Getting pretty late, so good night, Jimmy and Carol, and pleasant dreams. Always remember that you're traveling the safest and soundest way there is to travel when you travel by train. We've been talking mostly about passenger trains. But how many of you know that about half of the trains in the country carry no passengers at all? That's right, they carry freight. Things that are so important in our daily lives. The food we eat. The clothes we wear. The fuel we burn. Almost everything we use depends at some stage on the service of railroads. On the fertile fields of the North and West are grown the millions of bushels of grains which are so much a part of our everyday diets. The railroads move these grains to huge storage elevators or onto the mills. Then later on, when the grains have been ground, the railroads move products, such as flour, to the cities and towns to be baked into the bread which we find every day on the shelves of our neighborhood grocery stores. Moving cattle and sheep from the great ranges of the West is another important railroad job. The cattle are first rounded up. Then they are loaded into special railroad cars to be moved, sometimes long distances, to packing houses where they are dressed. Then the meats are moved again to the meat markets of the country. Eventually, through the help of railroads, we have meat on our dinner tables. Fresh fruits and vegetables, things known as perishables, are handled in special refrigerator cars, kept cool with ice or with machinery that works like your refrigerator at home, to keep perishables fresh while they are being moved, sometimes as far as 3,000 miles. Railroads are depended upon to move the nation's raw materials to factories, which will make them into finished products. Iron ore, scooped from the mines of Alabama and the great ranges of Minnesota, are moved to the nation's blast furnaces to be made into iron and steel. The railroads also buy millions of tons of finished iron and steel every year for their cars and locomotives, tracks and bridges. Coal is one of the most important things carried by the railroads. Millions of tons are moved every year to keep power plants and factories working. Railroads are depended upon to deliver the coal to towns and cities, to keep homes, hospitals, schoolhouses, and other buildings heated during the cold winter months. Railroads are one of the coal industry's customers, too. They buy large quantities of coal every year for their steam locomotives and for other railroad uses. Railroads carry forest products, logs and pulpwood, from the forests to the mills. And they carry the lumber and the paper and other products made from wood or wood pulp to the places where they are needed. Cotton, grown in Dixie, is moved to the textile mills of New England and the Southeast, where it is made into cloth for clothing and thousands of other important items. Oil is moved by the railroads in huge quantities, too. And the railroads buy and use a large part of all the fuel oil sold in the country every year. Railroad tracks go right down to the docks of the nation's seaports, so that freight cars deliver the products of farms, forests, mines, and mills to the ships that will sail with them to the far corners of the world. And so that things from other countries can be loaded directly into railroad cars for delivery all over America. When you stop to think about it, you realize what a great big job the railroads are always doing, and why they are the nation's most important form of transportation. Always on the move, day and night, delivering all the many things that America needs to keep warm, well-fed, and properly clothed. And here is something that many of you may not have realized before about the railroads of America. And that is that they pay enough in school taxes alone to provide an education for hundreds of thousands of school children every year. Say, it's time we were getting back to Carol and Jimmy. They'll think we've forgotten all about them. Here's their train coming into their station, and right on time. It looks like their aunt and uncle are pretty happy to see them, too. Well, the train is ready to start moving again. There she goes, pulling out of the station, gathering speed, carrying other passengers, mail, express, and baggage to other stations. We certainly hope you've had a nice time coming along on this trip with us, and that you've learned something about railroads that perhaps you didn't know before. We hope each and every one of you will be able to take a trip on a train very soon. Perhaps you'll want to visit a big city. Maybe you'll prefer to take a vacation trip to the wide open spaces. No matter where you might want to go, remember there are always trains to take you. And when you go, you'll see how big and how wonderful your own United States of America really is. Railroads are an important part of America. They play an important part in our daily lives, carrying millions of tons of freight and millions of people every day of the year. That's one of the wonderful things about this country of ours. Here, people can go where they want to go, when they want to go. Yes, this is indeed a great land. A land of opportunity. A land made great by the efforts of individuals. Individual efforts which have raised ours to the world's highest standard of living. Here in America, a person can worship God as he chooses. He can go to the church of his choice. This is a land where a person can go to school and be educated to the extent of his ability and desire. From kindergarten to universities as fine as are to be found anywhere in the world. This is a great country, America. A country of the people, by the people, for the people. A country whose flag we are always proud to honor, and whose rights, principles, and freedoms we are always proud to uphold. It was upon these principles and freedoms that this nation was built, and these same principles and freedoms held fast by America's youth. A youth educated in her history and traditions are the greatest hope, the greatest protection for the future of this, the greatest of all countries, our country, the United States of America.